Texas Hill Country, March 1874. It was barely past dawn when the dry wind carried gunfire across the limestone ridge, and Gentry Delaney shoved open the lopsided barn door with a rifle in her hands and fury in her bones. She had warned them. She had told the Crawley boys if they came sniffing around again, there would be no more warnings. But men like that never listened to women like her. Not when she wore trousers for work and kept her late father's ranch running without anyone's help. Not when she was unmarried at 24 and had no desire to be tamed. They called her wild. Said she was not marriage material. The Crawley boys Jim and Ellis were riding off now, yelping like kicked dogs, one of them holding his bleeding shoulder. Gentry stood at the gate, rifle steady, heart pounding. "Next time I shoot to kill," she shouted after them. Two small hands clung to the edge of her skirt. She glanced down and softened. "Go on inside, Violet. Make sure your brother stays out of that flour sack." The girl nodded and scampered back toward the little house, her dark braid flapping behind her. Gentry exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. Violet was 6. Vincent was 4. Their mother, Gentry's older sister, had run off with a traveling musician last fall and never came back. Their father had died of fever 2 weeks later. That left Gentry. She had no husband, no parents, no siblings worth a damn anymore. Just 2 little ones depending on her, and a patch of land the bank kept sniffing around. Later that afternoon, while patching the chicken coop, she heard quiet hoofbeats. She turned, hammer in hand, and saw a rider easing up the dusty trail. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wore a worn hat pulled low and a duster that had seen years of trail dust. His gelding was tired but well cared for. The man swung down and led the horse by the reins, his eyes catching hers across the fence. "Gentry Delaney?" he asked, voice low but steady. She nodded, wary. "Who's asking?" "Ronan Jasper. I was told you needed help. Word reached the post in Mason something about squatters' threats. You filed a report." "I filed that 3 months ago," she said, frowning. "No one came. Just got reassigned here. I am here now." She studied him. He looked more cowboy than lawman. Dusty boots, calloused hands, a revolver strapped low on his hip, like he knew how to use it. "I do not need saving," she said. "Good," he replied, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I do not do saving. I do helping." She liked that better than she wanted to admit. That night, he camped by the barn, rolling out his bedroll near the fence. Gentry brought him beans and cornbread without a word. He tipped his hat in thanks. The silence between them stretched, but it was not the awkward kind, just quiet. The next morning, she found him mending the busted fence with her tools. She narrowed her eyes. "You do not have to fix my place." He looked up. "No, but I want to. I do not like seeing things broken when I can help it." Later that week, when Ellis Crawley came back, drunk and mean, Ronan was ready. He stepped between Gentry and the man without hesitation. "You are trespassing," he said calmly. Ellis sneered. "This ain't your land." "No," Ronan said, voice turning cold. "It is hers. That means it is mine too." Ellis tried to draw. Ronan was faster. One clean shot into the dirt by Ellis's boot sent him scrambling back to his horse. Gentry stood frozen, chest tight. Ronan holstered his gun and turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." That night, she brought him stew instead of beans. Sat with him by the fire after the children were asleep. He handed her his flask. She took a sip. "People talk about me," she said after a while. "Say I ain't fit for marrying." Ronan looked at her, long and honest. "Good," he said. "I do not want a material. I want you." She looked away, eyes stinging. "I mean it." he added, voice softer now. You are real. You fight. You protect. You love hard. That is more than any man could ask for. She swallowed hard. You barely know me. I know enough, he said. I know you did not leave those kids behind. I know you stand your ground. That is all I need to know. She did not answer, but she did not move away either. The next days passed quiet and steady. Ronan stayed, fixed what needed fixing, watched the children when Gentry had to ride into town. He never asked for anything, but he was always there. One evening, Violet climbed into his lap and fell asleep. Gentry stood in the doorway watching. He looked up at her and she knew. He was not going anywhere. They sat on the porch after the sun went down, the children asleep inside. Gentry leaned back against the post. You really mean to stay? Yes. And what would a man like you want with a woman like me? He turned to her, eyes steady. Everything. She blinked fast. I do not know how to be someone's wife. I do not want a wife, he said. I want you. She reached for his hand. He laced his fingers through hers, warm and sure. You are not afraid of hard? She asked. He shook his head. Not one bit. She leaned against him, heart finally quiet for the first time in years. And though neither of them said the word out loud, it was already happening. They were falling, and neither of them was going to stop. April brought green to the hills, soft and slow. The mesquite trees budded out in pale leaves, and the peach tree by the house gave its first shy blossoms. A windmill creaked in the distance, turning steady as breath. Gentry sat on the porch rail, mending a tear in Violet's Sunday dress, while Vincent played in the dirt with a pair of carved horses Ronan had whittled from cedar. The boy kept one tucked tight in his fist, like it might run off if he let go. Ronan was down by the creek, shirt sleeves rolled, boots off, hauling stones from the bank to line the garden beds. He worked quiet, like the land spoke to him and he listened close. Why'd you take to this? She asked when he came back up, arms streaked with mud and sweat. This ranch. Me. Any of it. He tipped his hat back, not out of show, just to meet her eyes. I never had a place that held me, he said. Not till now. She looked down, needle paused mid-stitch. You been running long? Since I was 17. He said nothing more, and she didn't ask. The silence between them had grown into something solid like post and beam. It didn't need filling. That night, a storm came in. Not the loud, crashing kind, but slow and soaking, the sort that rattled window panes and brought out the scent of wet cedar. Violet had a bad dream. Gentry woke to the girl's small voice calling out, and when she got to the children's room, Ronan was already there, crouched beside the bed. He didn't say much, just rested a hand on Violet's back until her breathing slowed. Gentry stood in the doorway, arms crossed against the draft. You sleep light. Ronan nodded, voice low. Comes from too many nights without walls. She didn't go back to sleep after that. Neither did he. By morning, the creek had risen. One of the calves had gotten itself stuck in the mud near the south fence, and it took both of them to drag it free. Gentry waded in without hesitation. Skirts hitched, boots sucked into the muck. Ronan didn't try to stop her. When they got the calf onto dry grass, trembling but alive, she stood there, soaked and shivering, hair stuck to her face. You're bleeding, he said, pointing to her shin. Barbed wire, she muttered. He crouched, pulling a handkerchief from his coat pocket. Let me see. She hesitated. I won't fuss, he said. Just want to keep it clean. She let him. His hands were careful, steady, warm against her skin. He didn't speak while he worked, just tied the cloth gentle over the scrape and looked up at her. That's the second time you've patched me, she said. He smiled faintly. I reckon I'd do it every day if it meant you'd let me stay. Later, after the children were in bed, She poured him a cup of coffee brewed dark and strong. They sat by the stove, not touching, but closer than before. "I was supposed to marry a banker once," she said, eyes on the fire. "Before the war." He didn't speak. He said I was too sharp-tongued, that I'd never make a soft wife. "I don't want soft," Ronan said. She looked at him, guarded still. "What do you want?" He didn't blink. "A woman who can ride fence and raise children and look a man in the eye without flinching. I want someone who doesn't apologize for her strength. I want you." The words didn't come hurried. They came like everything he said, measured, certain, rooted. She let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. "Then you'd best not spook easy," she said, "because I've got thorns." He leaned in slightly, voice low. "So do wildflowers." They sat like that until the fire burned low and the room was filled with the hush of night and the creak of wood settling. She didn't ask him to come inside her room. He didn't ask if he could. But when he rose to leave, she caught his wrist. "You can stay," she said, "if you want." His hand settled over hers, rough palm warm. "I'd like that," he said. And when he followed her through the narrow doorway, it was not with hunger or haste, but with a reverence quiet as rain. What they built that night wasn't rushed. It was made of all the things they hadn't said, all the steadiness between them, all the weight of what they'd already chosen. Come morning, his boots were by her bed, and her head rested on his chest, and outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and the promise of something lasting. Neither of them said the word love, but it was already there, growing like roots under hard ground, deep, slow, and sure. The first time Ronan drove a team for her, Gentry watched from the rail with her arms crossed, testing him in silence. The mules were stubborn, the wagon heavy with fence posts and seed sacks, and the track down to the bottom pasture still slick from last week's rain. He handled the reins with quiet patience, not jerking or cussing when the left mule balked at the creek's edge, just clicked his tongue, kept his voice level, and waited. The animal stepped forward on its own after a long minute. Gentry nodded once and went back to her work. By May, the cottonwoods had leafed out fully, and the fields whispered in the wind like distant voices. The planting was done with calloused hands and sunburnt necks. Gentry and Ronan worked side by side, sweat tracing lines through the dust on their skin, neither one needing to talk much in the heat. One evening, as they shelled beans on the porch, Vincent curled up asleep between them, and the lantern burned low on the step. She said, "You ever had your own land?" "No," Ronan said. "Closest I came was a claim up near Fort Griffin. Lost it to a flood before I could finish the cabin." "You want land still?" "I want what I've got now." She glanced at him, quiet. He turned a bean pod in his fingers, slow. "I used to think peace meant being left alone. But you showed me it's something you build, not something you wait for." Gentry didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her hand found his under the bowl, rough fingers twining with rough fingers. Her neighbor, Mrs. Carver, rode out the next morning, sharp-eyed and thin-lipped as ever. She brought eggs and judgment in equal measure. "He stays in your house now?" she asked, gaze flicking toward Ronan, who had his shirt sleeves rolled and was teaching Violet how to braid twine into a lead rope. "He works the land, feeds the children, and tends the stock," Gentry said. "That's more than most husbands do," Mrs. Carver sniffed. "He's not your husband." Gentry's jaw tightened. "He's not leaving." That evening, she found Ronan at the edge of the property, fixing a sag in the south fence. The sun was low, painting the hills in long gold strokes. He looked up when she neared, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "Carver came by," she said. "I saw. She doesn't think I ought to keep you. What do you think?" "I think I don't care what she thinks." He watched her for a long moment, then stepped closer. "I didn't come here to be kept." I came to build something with you. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You always talk like you mean every word. That's because I do. Later that night, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, she said, I never wanted marriage. Neither did I. But I want this. He shifted closer. Then let's call it what it is. Ours. No preacher. No need. You and me standing together, choosing it every day. That's enough for me. She rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and low. Inside, they sat quietly, the weight of the day giving way to something softer, a peace they didn't speak of, only lived. By late June, the air hung thick with heat and dry grass scent, and the soil cracked in places where the creek no longer reached. Gentry kept a damp cloth tucked beneath her collar, and Ronan tied a bandana around his neck to catch the sweat. The cotton rows held steady, but the squash wilted by noon, and every drop from the rain barrel was counted. They had built a rhythm, not just in chores but in how they moved around each other, passing tools without asking, sharing water from the same dipper, leaving the back door unlatched if one was out late checking stock. That morning, Gentry had taken the wagon into town for salt and axle grease. When she returned, she found Ronan at the back of the house, sawing old cedar planks into clean boards. Violet sat nearby, trying to stitch together a doll's arm with stubborn fingers, her tongue caught between her teeth. What's all this? Gentry asked, brushing dust from her skirt. Ronan didn't stop sawing. New pantry shelves. Yours are bowing in the middle. Figured we'd use the cedar from the barn loft. She crossed her arms. You didn't ask. I didn't figure I needed to. She squinted at him, then gave a short nod and turned to the girl. That's not how your mother taught you to stitch. Violet looked up, face pinched. I can't make it hold. Try looping the thread twice before you pull, Gentry said, crouching beside her. It won't slip as easy. Ronan paused his sawing. You sound like you taught that to someone before. Gentry didn't look up. I used to help our mother mend linens, back when we still had guests. He set the saw down. You ever think about that, running a place with folks coming in and out? A boarding house, maybe? She sat back on her heels. I think about what keeps us fed. That's enough. But if you could? He asked. If the ground was steady, nothing pressing. She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. Maybe. I always liked the idea of feeding people who weren't just passing through. Something about putting food into hands that come back. He stepped closer, voice low. I'd come back. She met his gaze, not smiling, but there was something softer in her eyes. You already did. That night, after the shelves were up and the children asleep, she brought out a length of muslin she'd kept folded in cedar shavings since last winter. She unrolled it across the table. I was going to use this for curtains, she said, fingers smoothing the fabric. But there's enough for a new dress. Ronan nodded slowly. That for Sunday meetings? No, she said. For harvest. Something lighter than wool. She didn't look up when she said it. But he reached out, hand resting over hers on the fabric. You planning on me being here come harvest? Don't see how I'd manage without someone who can handle the mules and make the baby laugh. Vincent had taken to Ronan fast. The boy followed him from pen to pasture, dragging his little boots through the dust, asking questions he barely waited to hear answered. Ronan's hand stayed on hers. I want to be here, Gentry. Not just for harvest. For good. She didn't pull away. You still sure? Even now that the shine's worn off. I didn't come here looking for shine. I came because I heard a woman stood her ground against men who thought she wouldn't. She looked at him then, eyes unreadable. They said I wasn't marriage material. He gave a slow breath. Good. I don't want a material. I want you. The lantern flickered. Her hand turned under his, fingers curling around his palm. I'm not easy, she whispered. I don't need easy. I'll fight you when I'm scared. Then I'll stay until you aren't. He leaned in, brushing his lips to her temple, not demanding, just there. Solid. Real. You don't have to wear that dress for me, he murmured. I'm not. I'm wearing it for me. She looked up, steady now. But I'll let you help me hem it. He nodded once, a quiet acceptance settling between them like the night settling over the hills. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dry cotton leaves. Inside, they stood at the table, hands still joined, a life unfolding stitch by stitch. The first frost came early that year, silvering the barn roof and curling the last of the squash vines before dawn. Gentry rose before the sun, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders as she lit the stove. The wood crackled slow, sending thin trails of smoke into the chill morning air. Ronan had already gone out to check the stock. She heard the low thud of boots on packed earth before he stepped through the door, breath fogging in the cold. He set down a bucket of milk and glanced toward the hearth. Fire's low, he said, rubbing his hands together. I just lit it, she replied, pulling the coffee pot from the shelf. You always beat sunrise? Most days. He crossed the room, took the pot from her hands without a word, and poured water into it from the kettle. She let him. They worked like that in the dim light, not speaking much, but the silence was warmer than the stove. Later, while the children helped shell corn out on the porch, Gentry sat at the table with a set of papers spread before her. She'd borrowed the county ledger from the clerk in town, her name written neat beside the acreage line, but she didn't trust ink to do what hard work already had. Ronan leaned over her shoulder. You thinking of selling? She shook her head. I'm thinking of securing it. If something happened to me, it won't. But if it did, she said, turning to meet his eyes, I want it to stay theirs. He pulled out the chair beside her. Then let me sign my name beside yours. She studied him. You sure? I've lived longer on the trail than most men do in one place. I've had my fill of drifting. She laid the pen between them. We do this, it's permanent. I want permanent. She wrote his name slow, careful, beside hers. When she finished, she looked up at him, and something in her face shifted. You ever have kin? She asked. Not for 20 years. No cousins, no aunts? None that remember me. She folded the papers once, then again, and set them aside. Then maybe it's time you had new ones. He didn't answer right away. Just watched Vincent chasing Violet through the patch of frost-burned grass and said, I'd like that. The harvest came leaner than expected, but enough. They stored what they could, dried the rest. Ronan built a smokehouse from leftover lumber, and Gentry patched the roof with oilcloth from the mercantile. The days shortened. The light changed. One evening, as the wind picked up and a storm threatened from the west, she stood in the doorway watching the clouds roll in. Ronan stepped behind her, arms circling her waist. You ever think about taking a trip somewhere? He asked. She leaned into him. Where would we go? Doesn't matter. Just wondered if you ever wanted to see something different. I used to, she said. But now. She looked out at the land, at the hills that held the shape of her life. I think I'd rather build what's different here. He kissed the top of her head. Then here's where I'll stay. The storm rolled in after midnight, loud and long. The next morning, a branch had fallen across the back fence. Ronan hitched the team without being asked. By the time he returned, the kettle was on and Gentry was standing at the table with a small tin box in her hands. My mother's, she said when he stepped inside. She kept her wedding things in it. He set his gloves aside. You want to open it? She nodded. Inside were 2 bands of dull gold, a folded scrap of linen, and a pressed sprig of rosemary. She touched the rings, then looked at him. "I want to wear one." He stepped closer. "We'll need someone to speak the words." "I don't need words," she said. "I just need you to say yes." He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She slid one of the bands onto her finger. He did the same. The gold was worn smooth, but it fit. That evening they told the children. Violet climbed into Ronan's lap without a word and laid her head against his chest. Vincent reached for Gentry's hand and asked if he had to call him Pa now. "You can call him whatever feels right," she said. Ronan looked at the boy. "As long as I get to be here, I'll answer to anything." Winter settled in. They sealed the windows with flour paste and muslin, stacked firewood in every corner, and boiled sorghum candy after supper. Gentry taught Violet how to bind a quilt. Ronan helped Vincent carve a slingshot from a dry pecan limb. In the quiet of early mornings, Gentry would find him out by the fence, watching the horizon as if listening for something. One day, she stepped up beside him and asked, "You still waiting for the road to call you?" He turned to her. "No. I'm listening to the land now." She slipped her hand into his. "What's it saying?" He smiled, eyes soft. "It's saying stay." And he did. He stayed when spring brought the first green shoots and the creek ran cold again. He stayed when Violet lost her first tooth and Vincent learned to crack a whip. He stayed when the neighbor's barn caught fire and they rode out in the dark to help. He stayed through everything. The ranch never became rich, but it held steady. The land gave enough, and the house stood warm through each season. Gentry wore her mother's ring until her fingers thickened with age, and then she tied it on a ribbon around her neck. She and Ronan never needed anyone to declare them husband and wife. The land had done that for them. Every fence post, every planting, every morning shared over black coffee and quiet glances, those were their vows. And they kept them, every one.